Good morning, evening and afternoon everyone. Today was the day I was going to be one with nature, go out for my groceries by walking across the street. However, now it's raining, so my plans have been foiled. Now, talking about plans being foiled, we also have Blizzard's plans to talk about, because we have had our video about the balance tuning coming in this reset. However, Blizzard went back on their word on a few of these changes, some controversial, some not. So let's start with the more average one, which is the change to BM. So initially, BM was planned to have their very problematic talent Basilisk color to be nerfed by quite a lot, by like 60%. We mentioned this. Why was it problematic? Usually one talent point equals, 5% more damage, 3 to 4 to 5% more damage, depending on how good it is. 1 point in Basilisk color was like 15% more damage for BM, and specifically in single target. So it was keeping the entire talent tree trapped. So it was even something BM hunters wanted, to have this talent nerfed and put more of their power elsewhere, so they were more free to play around without this talent. Blizzard did nerf this talent by quite a lot. The problem was that the compensation, what they got in return for having this talent nerfed, was very poor. It was a 16% damage increase to kill command and only a 4% damage increase to their pet. So Blizzard came up with a better compensation now. The compensation is that the pet damage goes up to 8% instead of 4%, and also your damage is increased by 8%. So now, what was previously going to be a 10% single target damage nerf is only a 4% single target damage nerf, and what was previously going to be some 8 to 9% AoE damage buff is now up to and above a 15% AoE damage buff. This was also to try to increase the poor state currently that Beastmastery is in when it comes to their power in AoE, which is the worst practically out of any spec. This is, however, the complete opposite of their current power in single target, which is the best out of all of the specs. However, this result is slightly inflated though, because if we go to the rankings rather than the statistics and we look at the power of BM Hunter, you will find that they have something in common. If we start scrolling down here, you will see one thing they all have pretty much. That one thing is to the right, and that thing to the right is a number. That number is the amount of PIs that BM Hunter is given, because even in our pre-season release simulations, we did look at the DPS gain of Power Infusion, and the highest winner of PI was BM Hunter. So technically speaking, their current power, even in single target, is slightly inflated right now by the power of their PI, not just their own damage. Now, with this nerf to Basilisk color, BM Hunters will likely ditch 1 point in Basilisk color in order to pick up Wild Instincts, because Wild Instincts is essentially a burst talent to buff the damage of your Call of the Wild, which is what you use with PI. So this is to make you even stronger within your PI, so even after your nerf, you will still be the #1 target for PI in the raid. But overall, your single target damage is indeed nerfed. What's the problem with this is that you are still going to be terrible in AoE, you're still going to be nowhere near relevant in AoE, and still significantly worse than marksmanship, and no reason at all to switch to BM in Mythic Plus, because marksmanship would still be stronger. And you have now lost your niche uniqueness of being the best spec in single target. You will go further down to being, towards the top half, certainly, but not, the best as a raid spec, for example. Then we have another addition to the balance tuning, something that wasn't touched when we looked at rogues. The main rogue being changed was Outlaw. Now, Outlaw is not doing particularly well in the raid. In Mythic Plus, despite their actually pretty decent results in terms of damage, they're not really being considered. Definitely the main pick is Assassination at the moment, but we have an added buff to Subtlety, because Subtlety gets 35% more damage to black powder. And you would be thinking, well, I guess it's warranted, given that if you were talking about a terrible spec in AoE damage, well, this is another one, so makes sense to buff their AoE. Well, that's kind of the problem right now, because if you go to your run-of-the-mill mythic class keys right now, you look at a sub-rogue and you're like, okay, how much of this damage is increased? 35% more damage to black powder. Well, the problem is they're not using black powder. The problem is right now black powder is so bad it's not even being clicked by Subtlety Rogues. They would rather just use secret techniques as their AoE damage burst window rather than just going for this finisher right now. So that's even the thing for Subtlety Rogue, that they are not even using the ability that's being buffed. They will be after this buff, especially Trickster, which is the default hero talent in Mythic Plus. Now in 5+ target pools you would be using black powder. It would be even better actually for Deathstalker if Deathstalker was actually being played, especially in Mythic Plus, by sub-rogues. Even on 2 targets you would start using black powder. So we will see, I guess, after this set of changes, just how much will the damage of sub-rogue increase in Mythic Plus compared to where it currently is. However, we have to say the change of the day, once again, we have mentioned that this season we have gotten the healers to hog all of the attention. The change of the day goes to Holy Paladin, because the 5% healing nerf has been reverted. Not only that, but on top of that, they actually get buffed. That's right. They are now the second better healer overall in the raid. Even the actually good paladins in the raid are still the second best healers. Doesn't matter, they totally did not need a nerf. So the 5% healing nerf is reverted, and what they get on top is a compensation 30% Dawn Light healing buff. Why is it compensated? Right now, Dawn Light is, we can say, in quotation, suffering from the same bug that the Holy Priest's Halo is suffering, which is not having its healing reduced beyond 5 targets, which is what Dawn Light is supposed to be doing. Beyond 5 targets, this effect of Dawn Light is supposed to be reduced, but it wasn't. So now the hot fix is that it will be effectively reducing the healing done beyond 5 targets, but in return, the base healing of this Dawn Light will be buffed by 30%. So this is still a flat buff. On top of this, it's an even larger buff in Mythic Plus, because guess where you don't have to worry about healing more than 5 targets? Mythic Plus. So in Mythic Plus, this Dawn Light effect is flat out buffed by 30%. And it will still be relevant in the raid in pretty much most of the stacked fights where you can have a lot of effectiveness and value with your Dawn Light. For example, if you move from all of the bosses to a boss like Rashanan, the value of Holy Paladin is quite high. If you move over to something like Broad Twister, on the other hand, that's not nearly as good. But overall, it's a positive change now. So you went from being nerfed to now being buffed. Now, where do we have some complaints about this is the way, of course, the way that this change came about. Because if you read the notes of Blizzard, the thing they are saying is, after continued feedback and further review on performance, we have decided to revert the planned Holy Paladin nerf. And then additionally, we're also buffing it, What is surprising is that all it takes is 24 hours of comments on social media for Blizzard to respond to this feedback with a complete revert. I was expecting, I'm thinking in good faith that the Blizzard developer team is a team of experts, of scientists, of analysts, of mathematicians that work behind the scenes 24 hours a day to figure out the best course of action for the balance tuning. So how is it possible that the decision they came about to nerf Holy Paladin by 5% in healing was undone by 24 hours of posts on Reddit, on official WoW forums, and on Twitter by complete nobodies? Is the lobbying power of Ellesmere so powerful that makes Blizzard revert a change, or what? How is it possible that a balance tuning change is reverted within 24 hours? We have seen sometimes Blizzard reverting a change after community outcry, but these changes were generic changes, like you need to farm these items that many times for this wall quest, and players are complaining it's too tedious, so Blizzard fixes it. Or we are removing a portal from the portal room and players don't like it, so Blizzard reverts it. You know, these generic changes, these QOL changes that the players complain about, but not really something about balance tuning, something that presumably required days of data, of collecting information, of collecting results, of coming up with a conclusion and a solution to the tuning, that to be undone within 24 hours due to community outcry is not a good look. Because at the same time, for example, we can very openly say the nerf to BM is a much worse nerf that Paladin was about to receive, and yet BM doesn't get its damage nerf reverted. It's still a roughly 5% damage nerf in single target, and that's not being reverted. So what's the problem? Did BM hunters not complain enough to not be nerfed, to not have their nerf reverted, for example, compared to Holy Paladins? That's the main thing that makes this nerf reverse not feel very good. Not even about the nerf not being necessary for Holy Paladin, it's just the way it came about from Blizzard. The manner of the response of Blizzard in the way they reverted this nerf in basically 24 hours because some people cried on social media. That doesn't make you look very knowledgeable in what you're doing. Doesn't make you feel like you are in control of what you were trying to do with your balancing. That's pretty much the main bad point about this change. The last change makes them feel a little bit more in charge, although this was a bit more expected after it was, I guess, figured out, is the change that the Zekvir Vault, Zekvir's Lair, is no longer a valid target for your Great Vault credit. So yes, players figured out you could go to Zekvir's Lair, which would still count as a vault, pop in, kill Zekvir in 3 minutes, go out, go back in, kill him again, do it 8 times and have a full Great Vault slot at tier 8 value, and now that has been removed. Now, unlike the other changes, there is no compensation here. They're not lowering the amount of Great Vault slots required for delves. They are still 8 if you want 3 slots, and this little gimmick about Zekvir's Lair has been removed. So, with this out of the way, now we should have the full picture of the balance tuning that is gonna come today in NA, tomorrow in EU, with the added changes to Sub Rogue, to Holy Paladin, and to BM Hunter. Overall, I would say they're still all okay changes with the exception of BM Hunter. I still think the single target damage nerf was mostly unnecessary, and still, even if you were to nerf the single target damage that way, in that case the AoE damage buff is nowhere near the necessary amount. Unironically, the 15% AoE damage buff could be bumped up to a 40% AoE damage buff, and BM Hunter would still be in the bottom half of AoE specs. That's how bad they currently are in AoE. So not a good change for BM. The rest are fine in terms of pure numbers, not nearly as fine in the way they have been decided, in the way they have been communicated and sort of walked back on just because of some community response, which doesn't make Blizzard feel in charge of these changes. So with this, on this Tuesday, we're now done talking about balance tuning, hopefully before we actually get them live in a few hours. So with this out of the way, we're now leaving each other. Thanks, of course, everyone for having watched the video and for supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime... No. It's still raining, unfortunately.